Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta bhavantu sukhitatta.
Hello, I'm Dave Jacobson, and I'm here with the 7th episode of Nibbana, the secret treasure of the Buddhas. So far in this series, if you've been following along, we've been talking about the fact that Nibbana is non-conceptual. And so, just to wrap up this point so we can get on with the more interesting stuff, I'd like to summarize what we've talked about so far. Basically, the Buddha's teaching is about the fact that we don't really perceive the world as an objective shared reality. Rather, we perceive it as a subjective, valued name and form. And because of this, we think that we are powerless to change the reality of the world. But in fact, we have a tremendous amount of influence over our perceptions by how we decode or how we value or how we give meaning to this name and form. Now, name is a semantic structure, a fabrication made of terminology. It is a screen through which we perceive the world. Now there are Google Glass, and Microsoft is coming out with another thing that you put in front of your face, and it enhances, so-called, the reality with different computer-generated graphics and stuff. Well, that's not new. We already do that with our minds. And the way we do it is by applying semantic tags to the perceptions that come in through the senses. Now, this is diluting. And the reason it's diluting is that then we have a tendency to identify the name as the thing. We think the tag is the object, and then we try to manipulate it as if it were the object. And of course, that leads to all kinds of difficulties and ultimately suffering. Similarly, we don't really feel or sense the forms, the objects that we perceive. What we sense is the contact of our senses and the resistance of that object in different ways. So we're like the blind man and the elephant. We're feeling our way through this world by the resistance offered by the different things that we encounter. And we're not really in touch with the objective reality. In fact, the Buddha says there is no such thing. And quantum physics agrees that reality doesn't really exist. It doesn't really come into being. It doesn't really manifest phenomena until we encounter it with our senses. So, this name and form, Jnanananda calls it a formal name and a nominal form. In other words, we assign these labels, these tags, these semantic identifiers to different experiences. And then we have a tendency to believe that that is the reality, that semantic reality is actually true. I'll give you a great example. Take any corporation, like Apple, for example. I use all Apple equipment, so I'm not down on Apple. But Apple Corporation, Apple Inc., Incorporated, is just an abstraction. If you say, well, where is the Apple Corporation? Maybe you point to their new classy world headquarters in Cupertino, but wait a minute, that's not a corporation, that's a building. What have we done? We have overlaid an identifier on a thing. That this is the corporation. No, that's not the corporation. Well, then you might point to, Steve Jobs or whoever the guy is in charge now, that he's the corporation. No, he's not the corporation. He just plays a role in a business, like anybody else. So where is the corporation? Well, you might bring out all these papers that say, look, this is an Apple Inc. incorporated in the state of whatever, and so on, this country, that country. Well, wait a minute. That's just a piece of paper with marks on it. That's not a corporation. Where is the corporation? And the corporation, the country that it's incorporated in, the state that it resides in, the offices, all of these things, these are just abstractions. What we really have is a bunch of people doing a bunch of things, believing in the abstraction of this is a corporation, and I work for this corporation. I am the manager of so-and-so, or I am an engineer in charge of such and such. And because they believe this, they run around doing that or being that, and that is their reality. That is the day-to-day reality for all of us. Even enlightened people still have to use the consensus reality to get anything done. The difference is that we know it. We understand that it's just a consensus, that there's no objective reality out there. There's no objective existence of Apple Corporation or any corporation or any nation or state or any of that stuff. These are all simply abstractions, terms. So, we have a formal name. The name is supposed to be the form. We accept the name as the form, and we deal with it as if it were a form. But of course it's not a form, it's just an abstraction. And the other way around. We have nominal forms. Just like we have formal names, we have nominal forms. We have forms that we give a name to, like Spot the dog. Here's Spot the dog, right? Here's Spot, good boy Spot, Is Spot the dog? No. Spot is the name of the dog. Does the dog actually have a name? Not really. As far as we know, dogs don't use language, at least in the same way that we do. Maybe they express their feelings by barking and other sounds, but they're not really talking in semantic abstractions the way human beings do. So what does Spot have to do with this dog? Well, that's the nominal form. That's the name that we apply to that form, and then we deal with it as if it were the form. Well, did you get Spot his shots this year? Did you get Spot his food? You better go clean up Spot's mess. We have to use these terms for convenience sake. Otherwise, we'd be going around pointing at things and going, So it's all right. It's not a bad thing. The bad thing is when we use these abstractions without realizing that they're abstractions. The bad thing is that we get caught up in these abstractions and they become a tangle. And this is the tangle that the Buddha is talking about, untangling. And how does he untangle it? He untangles it by refusing to identify the name and the form, by keeping them separate, by seeing how they're just abstractions, both the name and the perceived form. So in this way, we get clear on what is what. Okay? That's one point. Another point is that by habit, our knowledge, what we think we know, becomes so deeply associated with words and symbols that just by manipulating symbols, we think we know something. Mathematics is a good example. Or philosophy. Has anybody ever become enlightened by philosophy? I don't think so. Of course, philosophy can be a useful tool to establish categories of meaning, an ontology, in which the attainment of enlightenment is possible. In the ordinary ontology, it's not. In the ordinary ontology, there is nothing about being, what to speak of non-being or enlightenment. There's no such concept in the ordinary person's ontology. This is why they're called puthujjana, or uninstructed persons. Uninstructed in the teaching of the Buddha. Because the teaching of the Buddha is an ontology. It's a systematic arrangement of terminology that allows us to perceive certain phenomena that we could never perceive without it. That's the value of the Buddha's teaching. So this teaching gives us a semantic set of coordinates and terminology that we can apply to our experience to begin to recognize these things. For example, jhana, or meditative states, states of concentration, and states of non-being, where we deliberately pull back our consciousness from this name and form. Now, why do we have to do that? Because enlightenment, as specifically Nibbana, is non-conceptual. Okay? That's the point we started out with in the beginning, and now I'm trying to wrap this up so we can move on. Nibbana is not a kind of thinking. Nibbana is not even a kind of consciousness. It is different from and separate from and beyond all these things, because all these things are founded in duality. Anytime you say a thing, well, that implies a whole worldview, where there is an I, and there is an object, and there is a perception of that object. This is an ontological triple. Now, if you haven't been over our other series, you won't know what I'm talking about. That's why I told you in the beginning you should go back and review, because we're going to be using these terms very often that require some deep explanation, and I don't have time to do it now. So you really should go back and look at some of our earlier series and catch up on this terminology. So an ontological triple is necessary for consciousness, for being, for perception, for understanding. So every idea, every concept, everything is an ontological triple, which consists of a subject, I, an object, the thing, and the perception of that thing. And included in perception is the relation of I and the thing, and so on like that. These are concepts. Every concept is an ontological triple. Every perception, every experience, every knowing is an ontological triple of some sort. And you can analyze things like this. So the thing is, Nibbana is not a triple. Nibbana is one thing. And it doesn't have a triple structure. It's the only thing that I know of that doesn't. I just called it a thing. I'm sorry. Language fails here. Language cannot describe Nibbana. But Nibbana is beyond language, beyond concepts, beyond consciousness, beyond duality or triples or anything. It's simply beyond the beyond. And that's why it's said of the Buddha, gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi swaha, that the Buddha is gone. He's gone beyond. He's gone beyond beyond. Okay? This bodhi, this realization, this is the main thing, swaha. He's offering this. He's becoming that. So, when we talk about the Buddha and when we talk about Nibbana, we have to realize that this is a state beyond everything. Okay? And we have to start to create a space in our consciousness, in our terminology, in our view of the world for this thing that's not a thing, for this experience that's not an experience, for this state that's not a state, that's beyond everything, beyond all words and concepts. So, how do we do that? Meditation. First of all, philosophical insight by learning the Buddha's teaching and the terminology and the ontology and the structure that comes along with it. Then phenomenological insight, by taking these insights about name and form and actually observing the process as it's going on in our own consciousness. This is essential. Just talking about it isn't going to accomplish anything. There are many people, I've met them, who are very learned in the Buddha's teaching. They can talk rings around me, but they don't know anything. Only words. Because they've been studying books and not doing the practice. So there are many people with advanced degrees in the Buddha's teaching, but they're not self-realized. They're not even very nice people, because they are caught up in this abstract structure of Buddhism, the religious view of the Buddha's teaching. And I don't have a whole lot of regard for that, because it doesn't include the actual practice. As we started out to explain, the Buddha's teaching forked, to use a software term, a long time ago, and more than 1,000 years ago, into the scholars and the practitioners. And at the moment, the scholars are 99%, and the practitioners are 1%. And even if you say, well, there are many monks and people doing meditation retreats and stuff like that, that's okay. But are they actually following the Buddha's teaching? Or are they following some scholar's version of the Buddha's teaching? Are they becoming enlightened? No. Why not? Because they're not following the complete teaching. They're following some system, some abstraction of the Buddha's teaching, some slice of the Buddha's teaching, maybe only a few suttas out of many, many thousands. And like the Buddha said, there will come a time when the monks will not be attracted to the suttas talking about emptiness, the profound, deep suttas, hard to understand, difficult to apply, but still, these are the core of the Buddha's teaching. And if we gloss over them and become enamored of the easy suttas that talk about, observing how your big toe is feeling this morning or something like that, I'm purposely making light of it. Actually, these are valuable methods and they shouldn't be glossed over. But they're only the beginning. They won't lead you to enlightenment. There comes a point, to quote my meditation teacher, Venerable Upali, there comes a point where you have to take a leap into the unknown, a leap into emptiness, a leap beyond words and symbols, beyond concepts, beyond form. You have to take this leap, and into the abyss you fall. So what is this? This is going beyond words and symbols, beyond consciousness. Last time I talked about a very easy method to experience bliss, where you simply reverse the flow at the Ājñā-cakra and then put your attention on this Sahasrara chakra, and then I get so blissed out whenever I even think about it that it's hard to put things into words. But anyway, if you can do this, you can very easily get a taste of Nibbana any minute, just a few seconds, as long as you know the method. The difficulty is that we are so hung up on words and symbols, we can't do the method. We can't shift gears out of conceptual thought and go into non-conceptual being. This is the problem. We can talk about Buddha's teaching all day long, but if we don't come to this realization that it's non-conceptual, that Nibbana is beyond words and symbols, we can never realize it for ourselves. And that's the problem. The problem is that we are aware only of the words and symbols and not of the actual reality. If we were, we would see that actually we attain Nibbana every night when we go to sleep. when we go into deep sleep. But because we don't see that, we don't appreciate it for what it is, and we don't realize that Nibbana is an absolute necessity. It's a necessity for life, and it's a necessity for death, in the sense that at the time of death, we are going to be pulled into this vast emptiness, this nothingness, the state of non-being, preparatory to fabrication of the next embodiment. Are we going to accept it? Are we going to go with grace and lightness? Or are we going to struggle? Are we going to try everything to stay in the body? Spend all of our resources on some extravagant medical procedures, and in the end, they're all useless anyway. It just makes the doctors rich, and not even the doctors these days, the hospitals and the drug companies. Are we going to make them rich, or are we going to become rich by realizing this non-conceptual Nibbana, which is beyond life and death, beyond being and non-being, beyond words and symbols?
Sabbe satta bhavantu sukhitatta bhavantu sukhitatta.